everyone else, it will take too long. Those who are attending the meeting will be able to see on the screen digitally, I guess, who is also here. So I'm going to first of all ask for any declarations. I'm going to do the formalities for the meeting first of all. So declarations of interest. If there are any, I think everyone's either interested or not interested, but for legal purposes, I don't think there are any, nor any relevant hospitality. If anyone's got any of those, then they need to say so, or preferably register them in advance. But okay, and do we have any apologies for absence?
Thank you, Chair. We've received apologies from Councillor Phipps from Dudley and Councillor Zafar from Birmingham.
Okay, anyone else want to report? I'm going to keep my eye on the screen. I'll nudge you if anyone. Right, nudge me if. Do you want
to put your microphone on as well, Councillor Coles?
That's a good idea. Put the microphone on. I don't normally need microphones, but I'm not sure whether it called well otherwise. So
hear you on the screen.
Is that right?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. In that case, my apologies for that. Okay. Right, I think it's not actually on the agenda, but I'm going to take it. Notice of substitutes first. Notice of substitutes. Have we got any substitutes? No substitutes. So I'm now going to deal. Chair's remarks is the next item on the agenda, but I want to deal with the petitions next, which seems to be the sensible place to do it. So.
We had a signal. I think there is a substitute from. Councillor Laura Taylor-Childs is Councillor Taylor-Childs. Are you indicating you were substituting?
That's right. Yeah, I'm substituting for Councillor Phipps from Dudley.
Okay, welcome, Laura.
Thank you.
Okay, so now I will go on to petitions, and first of all, I have a petition from Tim Weller in respect. It's quite a lot of, it's headed My Clues for a Clueless Floundering Wayward Government, and it basically is about the tram line. What I propose to do, because it's quite long, is that if we can circulate this, please, to all members and make it, reference to it in the minutes, and an appropriate response as well, please.
Yes.
Okay. Now I've been given that one. I understand there is another petition. Is that right? Can I be given information, or is someone going?
I've left it upstairs, Bob. I'm so sorry. I
have a copy.
I have the written. Yeah.
Bob, do you have a copy of the petition?
No, Ed's got it.
I'm so sorry. I've not got the physical papers with me, but they do exist, and you've got the written words there. And I think that's the important thing, is that we hear what the content is.
Are you happy to deal with it in that manner? If need be, we'll fetch it, and I'll get on with other stuff. But
explain it. Yeah.
If you can explain it. Do you want to come to a microphone? I've been told off already today about not speaking into microphone. So if you could just briefly explain it in the wherever you're being asked to go to. So.
Yes, this petition was drawn up and there were up to COP26 across the West Midlands region, and it gained over 800 signatures online and hard copies, and they were presented to Andy Street on November the 19th last year at the board meeting at Civic Centre in Wolverhampton, and it was called a zero carbon petition. Now, if I just start by giving you a very short quote. This comes from the IPCC Working Group 2 on impacts and adaptation to climate change. It noted, the disaster is more serious than projected by the models. Its effects are manifesting themselves more quickly and all the risks are increasing. The poor, indigenous peoples, women, children and the elderly are increasingly at risk, especially in countries of the global south. The policies followed to limit the damage are inadequate. run counter to sustainability and deepen social inequalities. The authors call for an inclusive approach to transform society at all levels. That was the IPCC Monday of last week, which outlines and confirms, I think, why we need a zero carbon approach. Our petition called for two things. One of them was an opportunity for citizens across the region to take part in discussing the WMCA plans. And we're very pleased that there's been movement on that, and we welcome the agreement to hold a quarterly forum. The first one's on March the 31st, and we'll do our best to try and build that and make it a big success. So that was part of the petition. The other part was for a zero carbon approach, because for us, net zero means carry on polluting with unproven mitigation technologies. Now, we can argue about practicalities, but we can't argue with the laws of nature and physics. And they're screaming at us, we have to stop what we're doing before we go over the precipice. And that means essentially stopping the emitting of massive quantities of greenhouse gases, primarily from the fossil fuel industry. We note that the WMCA's plans, net zero by 2041, have received a very favourable rating. But even under its accelerated version, it's acknowledged that it will be very difficult to comply with the COP's pleas for a 1.5 degree warming limit. So we just asked for a few extra points to be put into it. If you can just bear with me, I'll take 2 minutes. We think the West Midlands Pension Fund should divest from fossil fuels. We should follow the lead of Swansea, Newport and Herefordshire regarding free public transport, and Transport West Midlands should set up a feasibility study for its introduction in the West Midlands. End the incineration of waste. Call on CA residents to limit themselves to one return flight every 2 or 3 years, pending the development of zero carbon planes. Local authorities within the WMC area should do their best to urge proper climate environmental education in all schools. Stop good money chasing bad with HS2. Apart from the environmental devastation it's causing, it's vastly overpriced, while not linked to the European high-speed network and the 3 dead-end stations, London, Birmingham and Manchester. The Solihull interchange would churn up more greenbelt land, and as for the aim to encourage more economic growth, the planet is already not coping with the current level of economic growth. We just can't do any more. We only have one planet. So we think withdrawing support from this failing project would be most useful. On the tram network, I enjoy travelling on trams, and they're more accessible for buses and trains for disabled people and prams. But they're also very expensive to build and emit a huge amount of CO2 from cement and steel in construction. So the uneasy compromise is to stop more growth of this network and use the money instead to upgrade the current bus and network instead. Finally, we've got a query. A major source of emissions is from domestic buildings. So retrofitting heating installations is a top priority. The CA plan says it will complete the job for its 1.1 million homes by 2041. That's about 50,000 a year, I make it. So for Birmingham, for example, that would be up to 20,000 homes per year. Yet the plans of Birmingham City Council, even with its e-bigs project, don't seem to go anywhere near this target. So we're puzzled, don't understand what's going on here. So who will be doing this retrofitting? Could we possibly have the plan for this retrofitting published? I think that would be a great step forward. So thank you for listening. Over the course of hopefully a short time, we hope the CA takes on board some of the measures mentioned here, and we move towards a zero carbon approach, which nature is demanding. So there are 2 parts, the forum and the zero carbon approach. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I mean, there's quite a lot you've put in there, and I think we will study. Obviously, we're already taking action to study those aspects. I think one of the things that I want to make clear, and I'm not going to try and respond to this, I just want to make 2 or 3 points. One of those is, I hope it's evident from the action that the combined authority is taking the action, Andy Street is taking the action that I am taking in terms of environmental function, but also the action I've been taking personally and in Solihull. We treat this very seriously and really understand the effect on this planet of the issue of use of carbon. So I don't think there's any difference on what our overall objective is. I think the issue is probably how you get there. And I think that's, you know, that if we take action that actually loses jobs and loses economies and loses livelihoods, then that potentially could make the situation worse. So I think it's the means how we get there, and that rather than the intent to get there. And my own belief is that the climate change, and this is replicated both in the work of the CA, but also in the work that we've been doing in Solihull, is, you know, it's not also just about carbon emissions, it's about biodiversity, it's about pollution, it's about resilience. There's a whole bag of different things that need to be done here, and that you know, that we see as well. Some are dealt with locally, some are dealt with the CA, but we have endeavoured to push the highest possible priority to this subject in every aspect of what we're doing. Some is direct environment, some is dealt with through the means, the transport means that we're doing. I mean, the work that we're doing with you know, buses, but electric buses and then hydrogen buses is all in this direction. We're working hard in terms of house building, for instance, to look at, you know, approaching the zero carbons. I've written to government personally to stress the importance of the climate change in planning policy, so that we are doing an awful lot of things. Can we do more? You bet we can, and we will do. But I just think we do need to take action that is responsible. And frankly, we've got a point coming on later on behaviour change. And it's behaviour change that is going to be key to, in many ways, to delivering this agenda. You asked a question about domestic buildings and how we're going to achieve it. And I'm not, you know, I'm not going to answer this on behalf of the officers, because they will have their own view. Except I actually know quite a lot about this, as I'm from the building industry. Retrofit has a number of challenges. It's not just about money. It's not even about developing a skill base. It's about people's lives. You know, you get situations where, you know, you are intruding in people's lives, and we have to make sure that when we tackle this plan, again, we take people with it. One of the, I think my last remarks, because I would quite like to go on for a long time about this, but I won't. One of the things that we need to do in our programme across the country is to look at the benefits that can be derived from climate change action, and take people with us on that, because there are many benefits to reducing pollution, which of course is what Birmingham's done with its clean air zone, and that what we're doing on transport. We're not going to please everybody, but there are decided benefits about improving our green spaces, which we are doing in a number of places. Tree planting, that we're going to a big scale. My own authority, we've already planted 50,000 out of our target of 250, and I'm determined that we're going to keep that, pushing that. You know, biodiversity ways, all of these things we are doing. I repeat, can we do more? You bet we can do more, and we will do more, but we must do it in the right way. What I do want to say in conclusion, thank you very much for coming and expressing your views. And we really are, I am appreciative of this. But it's tricky. It's tricky, and I'm not going to say this is easy, and you know it isn't easy. But we will keep the work going. Thank you ever so much, and I hope that's helpful to you. Okay. Very good, very good. Thank you both, for your petitions, and we will respond, or are in the process of responding. Okay, I'll move on now, and I'll I'm not going to make any chair's remarks. I just made some remarks. I think, you know, record those, and that will be good enough. So, minutes of the meeting of the 1st of December. Is everybody okay with that? That was at Tisley, wasn't it? Yeah. That was an incredibly good visit. And I do like, I mean, for some reason we're in the office today, but I am encouraging, if we can, to make physical visits to look at stuff out there and bring some life, you know, some real life to meetings. Otherwise, we'll do them virtually, I think, because I just think it's more efficient and gets people on. So I'll just keep my eye on the screen. Okay, so minutes seem to be okay. So my first point then is on behaviour change, and it says retrofit right tree, right place, and CWG food. Now, I think Jackie's going to.
Yeah, it's Katie. I'm going to hand over to Katie.
Jackie's going to hand you. Who started? Come on, who's first? Katie.
It's Katie.
So Jackie's saying, hand it over to Katie while Katie gets set up.
Yes, I'm Katie. I'm the Environment Behaviour Change Project Officer, and I just wanted to go through our Environment Behaviour Change programme today. So I was going to start off with a bit of an update about where this work came from, and then go through some of the programmes of work that we've already started. So in terms of where this came from, so in May 2021, we commissioned the Behaviour Insights team to do a piece of work for us on how we communicate our net zero messaging across the region. So we asked them to create a strategy and plan of how we influence people's behaviour, but also how we communicate this messaging as well. So through this piece of work, they focused on a few different aspects. So one was around environmental communications. So they chose different framings to see what resonated the most with people across the region. So they looked at different ones like moral conservative, moral liberal, the economy, health, keep the messaging simple, and it came out that a simple messaging is really what resonates most with people. So as to say that what we're doing as a combined authority is trying to achieve net zero and why it's important. As well as this, it was really keen to say that the health messaging as well really resonated quite highly with people. So when we're trying to communicate about our work and net zero, the co-benefits that come with that and health was really resonated most with people as well. So from this piece of work, in terms of trying how to communicate this work, they surveyed just under 2,000 people from across the region, and the tagline West Midlands Greener Together was the messaging that really resonated the most with people. So that's where you can see on the bottom of the screen the West Midlands Greener Together has come from. So that's come from the research say that this is what people would like to see us use in terms of our messaging. But it is really keen to note that behaviour change isn't just about communications. It's not just about messaging. We can run lovely campaigns and put leaflets through doors to tell people to retrofit their homes or to plant trees. But at the end of the day, all of these need to be in tandem with behaviour change initiatives. So the Behaviour Insights team wrote 3 implementation plans for us to follow. So one was around retrofit, one was around sustainable food with the Commonwealth Games, and the third was around access to green spaces. So whilst communications and messaging is obviously really important, and that's where this West Midlands Greener Together came from, needs to make sure that it's in tandem with all the other initiatives as well, which I'll go through now. So the first focus then is on the natural environment. So the first campaign that we've run is the Right Tree, Right Place, and Councillor Faye, I know you came to one of the first tree giveaways.
I did. It's very good, thank you.
Thank you. So this then is a campaign around focusing on Right Tree, Right Place. So we committed to in the Natural Environment Plan that was published in September 2021 to run this campaign. So we started off with a focus on engaging householders or people to plant in their gardens or within their community spaces. So this was a bit of a trial to see trial and error to see what worked well. So we gave away 400 trees that were right size for people's gardens. Those events were held in Birmingham, Wolverhampton and Coventry. All of the trees were given away. We had really positive press, and the public were really engaged as well. We had reached about 200,000 people through social media as well, so it had really great reach. The virtual forest number, so what we wanted to do was to direct people to the virtual forest and to see the numbers rise on that. So it's gone from 58,000 to 71,000 trees registered on the virtual forest in the last few weeks. That's really great to see. Another campaign that we're looking at running is the Natural Environment Awards. So obviously, as we are working within this space, it'd be really great to recognise all the fantastic work that others are doing across the region on natural environment. So this is going to be an annual awards where we'd like to focus on community groups, businesses, local authorities and educational institutions, so schools, nurseries, etc., to really show the great work that they're doing within this space. So we'd like to launch these in June and then have the awards announced in September, so just before tree planting season. So we'd like to launch these quite soon. The second area of work, so this is the implementation plan that the Behaviour Insights team gave to us, and because the Commonwealth Games is such a big moment in time in Birmingham, said that it's a really great opportunity for us to promote sustainable food across the region. So what we are doing is we're having conversations with some of the caterers at the Commonwealth Games, and we're working really closely with the sustainability team at the Commonwealth Games. So we have conversations with Amadeus, who are the NEC catering contractors, Edgbaston Stadium and Russell Partnership, who are the Birmingham University catering contractors. So some of the interventions that we're looking at working with them on is carbon labelling. So you can see an example here where we can say that as the food has good carbon rating or poor carbon rating. What we'd like to see is to see if that does influence people's behaviour. So when they're at the games as a spectator, does this make them want to choose the more sustainable option when they can see that it has a better rating? Just to say that we do have funding from the Department of Culture, Media and Sports to support this work as well. Other things that we'd like to focus on is exploring different changes in language. So things like the word vegan has twice as likely to have more negative connotations if it's seen on menus. So can we do something where we change that language to see again if that incentivises people to choose sustainable food options? We also want to take a research-based approach to this work. So we've already been having conversations with Dr. Johannes from Birmingham, economics professor, to see if we can then again, just to see what works well, doesn't work so well in terms of promoting sustainable food, and use this as a legacy piece from the game so that we can use this research to go out to caterers and other venues to say this has worked well and to promote sustainable food across the region after the Commonwealth Games. Thirdly, then, is home retrofit. We're going to have George Sims, who's going to from Energy Capital team, who's going to talk more about the smart hub and retrofit work that the Energy Capital are working on. But again, the Behaviour Insights team wrote an implementation plan about how we can work on with the able to pay market to encourage them to take up home retrofits. And so there's three different things that we'd like to work on here. So one is the Clean Heat Grant, will be available from April this year. So this is a government grant that will be available for people to have air source heat pumps, ground source heat pumps and biomass boilers. So we quite like to promote this grant, but also to make sure that people are making the most informed decision when they're looking at the technologies for their homes, and so making sure that their homes are already well insulated before they go in to have these technologies. Within this Clean Heat Grant is recommended that people have smart meters. So it's again, we'd like to push smart meters for people to install those, and also to have a valid EPC rating as well. So EPCs are quite a low cost solution for people to see what their how much it take to heat their homes, but also advice on how they can make their homes more energy efficient. So this is what we'd start to work on, but again, there's going to be a lot of work within this space for the Energy Capital colleagues. So this is something that we'd like to start working on now, but it's going to be a very much a long-term campaign and how we work with people to encourage retrofit across the region. And finally, citizen engagement is a key part of our behaviour change work. So one of the first things that we are setting up is a net zero citizens panel. So this will be a group of representatives across the region that will help us co-produce and co-design the work that we are working on within the energy and environment teams. So we'll go to this group and ask them to support us with the work and to produce campaigns together that is informed by the people of the West Midlands. Secondly, we are setting up the West Midlands Greeners Together Forum. So this is a space for the public, environmental NGOs, activists to come to where we can work together and collaborate on how we achieve our net zero journey together. So the first meeting is on Thursday, 31st of March, 6 to 8. And yeah, I think it's just, we'll be learning as we go with this forum. I think it'd be a really great opportunity to work together and collaborate on this. We're also working with the Commonwealth Games to produce carbon literacy training. So we have carbon literacy already internally within the combined authority, where we, so the whole point of the training is to help people understand and confidently communicate what climate change is and what we can do to reduce our own carbon footprints and to reduce our impacts. So we are producing a version of this training for the Commonwealth Games. So it'll be aimed at volunteers of Commonwealth Games. So we're hoping to train around 5,000 people. But not only the volunteers, but also residents and SMEs as well will be able to have this training. So we're currently developing this training, and people who go on this training will also be able to receive a certificate to say that they have been on this training, so it's a certified course. And finally, we've been accepted onto the local climate engagement programme. So this is run by Involve. The purpose of this is how we as a combined authority can commission deliver high quality public engagement in relation to our climate decision making. So we're one of 15 local authorities, combined authorities to be in the coaching group. 75 applied, so we're really happy that we were accepted within this course. So we will, officers within the combined authority will go on this course. We'll have peer-to-peer learning with other local authorities about how we work within this space, and I think this will be really helpful, especially with my work in terms of setting up the citizen panel and working with the forum. But also to note that there is a 2-hour self-guided resource for councillors to support you thinking that how does participatory democracy and working with residents, how is that, how does it relate to your role? So that will be available once the officers have gone through that training. And then finally, just want to finish on some future work that we will be working on. So firstly, as the air quality framework was passed a few weeks ago, so looking at how behaviour change can work within this space, such as focusing on domestic combustion. Again, once the Commonwealth Games work is finished, can we take that moment in time to really push sustainable food across the region, to making sure that food is affordable, accessible and encouraged. So we hope the work we're doing with the Commonwealth Games will support that work. In terms, because behaviour change is known to be quite difficult to measure, we'd like to run a citizen survey to see that through the work that we're doing as the Energy Environment team, our attitudes and knowledge changing across the region. And so we'd like to do a citizen survey to see if attitudes are changing towards the climate emergency. And finally, with Transport for West Midlands, within that local transport plan, behaviour change has a really key focus within this. So we're working with them to see if we could present a more strategic sense to how we work on behaviour change, so to set up aims and objectives and how we link with this with our wider citizen engagement work. So just to have a more clear focus about where this work will go in the future and what should we be focusing on. And that's everything.
Okay, great. Thank you. I've got quite a few remarks to points to make as we go through this, and then I'll invite people to speak. I said earlier on I've got nothing no remarks earlier on, and probably note to self. Actually, I have got a remark to make, which is on the climate emergency rating, and I do think it's worth recording this. And indeed, because it's the first meeting since it happened, in terms of the rankings for climate change plans. And the CA was ranked top in terms of combined authorities. In terms of organisations and local authorities, I think it was 3rd or 5th. I think it was, I know my own council was up near the third or fifth, in depending how you look at it.
It was second, and I think Solihull was third, I believe.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which you know I think is worth recording. It's worth recording for a couple of reasons. One, because I think it's a thank you and a well done for the work that we have done. And I think that's important. The second thing is, though, it is a rating for a plan. And it's interpreting the plan into action. Now, why have I raised this now? And you'll say it's an excuse to put in a good result. Well, you might say that. It's actually, I'm thinking about the people behaviour bit, because it's actually quite a good thing to lead on when you're involving people to say, this is what we did. Can we do more? How do we make sure this plan works? So, you know, it's a bit of very striking news that I think will help us with this plan. So that's just an off the cuff thing that just occurs to me. Right, taking through these the various aspects here. Some of these are a bit sort of granular, but let's start with right tree, right place. Now, tree planting is a massively important subject, and you know I'm always out there trying to improve it. But what is a tree? What is a hedge? What's the value of each of them? And I do think hedges have a tremendously important role. Example, some gardens are not able to take big trees. They may be able to take cherries and stuff, but they can take hedges. Hedges are important for biodiversity. They're important for biodiversity corridors and certain species. So hedges are important. That's point one. The second point is the importance of gardens. And I'm making this point because trees seem to me nice and friendly, but I think this, you know, it links into a wider natural thing here. So importance of gardens, that what's happening is we're seeing, you know, gardens built on, which, you know, in reality, sometimes efficient use of land, but it's not necessarily efficient use, you know, it's not efficient for the birds and animals that live there, nor indeed the green stuff that absorbs the carbon. So there's an issue there about the importance of gardens, you know, and this links to trees, but also links to behaviour change. What can I do? Okay, third thing is, as people frequently say to me, you know, it's fine you planting all these trees, but what about the big ones that are coming down? And that is absolutely right. I mean, I know we don't just have a 1-for-1 in my council. We have a bigger number than that. I think most councils do. But you know, my point about this is my own belief is the protection of existing trees in this country is not adequate. I mean, we talk about behaviour change, but I'm sorry, but and I know this is a public meeting, but the reality is there's a substantial number of people out there that actually see trees as a nuisance. You know, they put leaves everywhere and I have to clear them up. I saw something in a local chat talking about, you know, how to deal with all the leaves all over the place. Well, get rid of the tree. I mean, I put something on there. And I just think this is important because we in a way, there's a bit of an echo chamber here about people interested in environment. But when you get out there, people don't see it that way. And, you know, it's a third, frankly, I think it's a quarter or a third people that see things as a nuisance. So, you know, I do think there's a behaviour change thing there. And frankly, whatever people think, this is important. I do not want a land, nor does anyone else, where the landscape is changed irretrievably. So can we just, I mean, feed that in either in that section or further on? And another point is the land for the tree. I have so many people say, I'd love to plant a tree. And to my answer is, well, so I want to do that, but actually we're running out of land to do it. So what we need is collaboration from any, you know, landowner. It could be private gardens. Actually, we found that with the work I've been doing very, very successful. There's a lot of people want to be, including landowners, want to be associated with this. But, you know, it's right tree, right place. But it's where is the land, okay? And that really is the message, because you know, it will need a fundamental change. I mean, I don't know Birmingham obviously as well as Solihull, but you know, what is Birmingham going to do? You know, we've actually, my council just bought a chunk of land for 60 acres for well, it's sort of vaguely for tree planting, although I think it's going to be more biodiversity than anything else. because we feel that, you need to invest in these things. I mean, not everybody can do that, but, the point I'm making is how important is where is the land. Right, I'm going to rush off because others will want to speak and I'm dominating it. Right. Go on to sustainable food, and it's great, but there's one word which I think we need to use. I hoped it would come following Brexit, but I didn't see a lot of it, and that is that word local. Make, consume, market locally. By doing that, you not only encourage local producers, but also you don't have the, you go into and you see cucumbers from, I don't know where they come from actually, but it's ridiculous importing stuff, and obviously the fuel thing is going to be high on the agenda now. Home retrofit, yeah, great. We come on to levelling up in a minute, in a few minutes. The point I consistently make is retrofit is, and I've made it earlier on, is a tough program. It's a tough call, and I know because I'm an ex-builder, the skills needed for retrofit are not the skills needed, for instance, in a lot of new build. It's different because every, two identical houses, but they're different. What we need is the skills, and what we need to lobby and push for is the, as I've said to Ed before, is the sustainable funding program that will give business and traders a confidence to take on staff and trainees, and that's number one, rather than here's £500,000 or whatever it is, spend it by the end of the year, because you can't mobilise in that time. And what we need is and that needs to be our ask. Because we don't get this sometimes. There's the connection between training and if I'm a plumber and once I employ you just you can't afford to take on apprentices and trainees in the hope that there'll be a contract later on. Okay, EPC's fine, but they're not. They cost. And if you're talking of fuel poverty, am I going to spend £100 or whatever to produce a report to tell me the blindingly obvious? And frankly, some of what they tell you is the blindingly obvious, like insulate and it will go down. Citizen engagement. I'm nearly to end. Citizen engagement. What can people do that does not cost money? Okay, everybody says government fund. There isn't enough money in the world to fill this program. We're all going to have to do stuff. So what can we do that doesn't cost? What information do people need? When I was a builder, I gave a book from Jonathan Porritt about saving the planet. So that is 100 years ago. But to say, look, you've got an energy efficient home, but if you leave the doors open, you're wasting everybody's time. So what do people need to behaviour change, and what help do they need for that? And I hope I'm nearly there. And I've already said it. Benefits. Less of frankly, the net zero because it's good for us, and more of the net zero because the benefits are there, in all ways. Now, I think we've got to push the benefits now. And on that point, I'm going to stop and look for hands because Matthew.
A quick point on trees, just picking up on what you said, Chair. Are we making an effort to link the whole tree programme into circular economy opportunities? Because there's some quite interesting opportunities, obviously, to pick up on people's tree waste. You can turn it into biochar, for example. Councillor Zaffa and I went to Stockholm 3 years ago. It's a fantastic project where the citizens of Stockholm bring their garden waste, tree waste, turn it into biochar, and then use that to fertilise street trees. Those kind of links. It might help address some of the issues of getting buy-in to some of these programmes. People who don't see trees always as a virtue. Are we still doing anything on that?
The Birmingham City Council are still doing some work on that with some of their tree nurseries, I believe, but it's certainly something that we can pick up in relation to the circular economy work.
Okay, pick it up. All right. Anyone on the screen? Nobody on the screen. Any comments from anybody? Yes, sir.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Katie. I did enjoy going to look at the virtual forest that you were holding at the university. Yeah. In actual fact, we did get some trees and we have been planting them. We've put it into Welsh House Farm, into their community gardens. Three gone in there. And I thought it was very good. And one thing, and forgive me, I was actually just having a look on my mobile, because I did take some pictures, because in the next room was our horticultural, one of them experts is Simon Needle, and he was showing us about biodiversity and others. And one great thing that I saw on there, which is why I was trying to find it on my mobile, but there was actually on a screen, it was actually showing a map chair of where all the trees are actually located. But one thing I found, it was disjointed, and Simon was saying that the maps, everything should be all brought together into one. So the West Midlands Combined Authority actually know where all the trees are, but at the moment Simon said it's not quite together. And I think you're right as well. Simon did actually mention that when you talked about trees, and he was saying that it's the right kind of tree in the right place, and that's one of the problems over years. From what Simon said, is where you get trees have been put in the wrong place, and the problems have been caused in where particular streets. So yes, I thought that was quite good, that particular thing, and certainly, excuse me, certainly welcome that carbon labelling menus. I thought that was very good. And the retrofit, as colleagues behind have actually said as well. Looking forward to George Sims's uptake on this. But also, Chair, it's also looking at companies that you and I and others have talked about, particularly how they use their roof space and other frontage and rears of their actual buildings. So we look forward to that, the agreement together, and I think that's very helpful. And that particular one you mentioned on 2.25, about 2 hours a guide for resources for councillors. Just through you, Chair, is how members throughout the combined authority, and probably non-constituents, how they all get to know about this potential training to help them to actually send the message out. And finally, on the transport, it is down, I think, as councillors, when Councillor Zafar and I have spoken about this, particularly for Birmingham, getting out of their car, it's all about connectivity. It's as simple as that. Giving the people that choice to be able to say, I can leave my car at home now because I can get onto public transport a lot more easier. Thank you, Chair.
I mean, you got problems with a lot of these agendas, haven't you? Because I mean, I've heard discussions with, I've heard Councillor Ward talk about, we've got to even carrot and stick. Well, and I said at the time, I'm not going to threaten my elderly residents in rural areas with a stick if they don't get public transport that isn't there. And realistically, public transport never will be there for some places. But it's horses for courses. I mean, I think transport, I mean, we've been doing some autonomous vehicles. Now, I know people sort of think about Star Wars and things when they look at these things, but in fact, I think it has real potential, in certain places, as the technology develops, particularly maybe for rural areas, but for, for areas that don't have a particularly good public transport system, and I'm thinking of my own in particular. So I think it's horses for courses. I mean, for instance, I think electric vehicles will help the people maybe that where there isn't good public transport, maybe rural areas, but in other areas there may be other solutions. And I mean, I'm impressed actually with the number of scooters and electric bikes and stuff that seem to miss me when I'm walking around these days. Certainly, it's obviously catching on, but it's not everywhere can do this. So I think this is this horses for course is something we need to work on. I mean, it applies to a lot of these agendas. We need to look at, at efficiencies of scale, for instance, and so on. So anyways, there's loads of stuff here. The virtual forest is not all the trees that are being, it can't be, because I know what we will have done by the end of this planting is 51. So either we're not putting them on, or this isn't a fair reflection of all the tree planting going on.
And I think finally, Chair, thank you. I think as you've echoed in a different way, as I've said back at Birmingham, we are taking people on a journey together. Yeah. It's very, very important. And I know that when they put in about talking about by certain dates, but that is one of the key things as well, that word by, because we've all said that we need to get where we can much earlier, but it's been like by 2041. We obviously know that we need to bring it together. And my final thing is that when at the meeting we have with Councillor Zaffa, is that we just have to bring people on that journey more together and make sure that we are not beating people with the stick. On that journey, we'll make sure that it works much better, and that behavioural change will certainly do it, I think. Thank you, Chair.
I think we're having an international stick that's going to beat us in terms of fossil fuels, big time. And I think that's going to make us realise that, and you know, a lot of these things are painful, and we're going to have to take people as, and I think the cost is where it's going to, whether we like it or not, you know, it's going to happen. It's already happening, but I think it's going to happen even more. I think we're finished on this actually for the moment. So I'm happy to move on to try and some semblance of keeping to the agenda. So if it's okay, members, I'm going to move on to the levelling up agenda, which we've touched on both here and elsewhere actually. But Ed, we'll switch the microphone.
It's the other button. That would help, wouldn't it? Thank you, Chair. Thank you, everybody. Just in terms of the levelling up white paper, I'm going to say a few words about the white paper itself. I'm going to say a few words about the process that we've established at the Combined Authority for exploring that white paper, in particular the Trailblazer devolution deal. And then I'm going to say a few words about the particular, let's call them the offers and asks that we're going to put to government, or we're thinking of putting to government in relation to that deal. So first of all, in terms of the levelling up white paper itself, as people have probably seen, it's a 323-page document, so it's extensive. Interestingly, it doesn't actually have a huge amount on it in relation to climate change and net zero. It does have a section which repeats some of the material that we've seen before in terms of the net zero strategy, but surprisingly, it doesn't have any of the levelling up missions relating to the wider net zero agenda. That's not to say that it isn't still a fundamentally important document, or that climate change, climate resilience shouldn't be seen as part of a levelling up agenda, certainly here in the West Midlands, which is the way in which we're approaching it. Other things to say about the white paper is it conducts some really interesting analysis into why it is we see such great disparities both within and between regions in England, and it identifies the fact that possibly economic development to date has focused too much on particular aspects of what it describes as capital, in particular infrastructure, financial capital, and it doesn't necessarily place enough emphasis on a more holistic long-term approach to tackling economic development. And so the thrust of the white paper is to say, how are we going to develop what it describes as systems change around how we do economic development. It then moves on to a set of policies, and amongst those are economic policies to do with research and development, innovation and so on. There's policies around housing and transport. There's policies around crime and education and skills. So there's a very wide suite. I think we counted about 120, 130 different policies that sit within the white paper. But the policy that I think has captured people's imagination in the West Midlands more than any other is the idea that the West Midlands might become a trailblazer for a third devolution deal. So one of the things the white paper does is it says that every part of England should now have some kind of devolution deal, but those that have had deals in the past can enhance them. And then in the case of Greater Manchester and the West Midlands, we are now going to be the trailblazers to really push the boat out on devolution. And in terms of what we've been told subsequently by officials, nothing should be off the table in terms of those powers and responsibilities that we might want to ask for from government if we can demonstrate that they contribute towards those 12 levelling up missions that are in the white paper. So as a consequence of that, we've established a process within the combined authority to work with partners across the region in order to identify that set of asks and offers to government that might go into this third devolution deal. To try and organise that process, we have identified 20 work streams, and that might sound a lot, but there's so much in the white paper, there are so many different issues that we might want to address with government at this point in time that we think 20 is the right number. It may well be that some merge with others over time, that some wither and don't move forward, but for now we're working through 20 work streams. One of those work streams is net zero, though it's a really, really important point to make that actually issues to do with both energy and the environment need to be incorporated into all of the other work streams as well. So it isn't just a case of, oh, we've got our work stream and this is where we put our priority. And I know, for example, Jackie and Richard and colleagues are working very closely with housing colleagues, transport colleagues and others to say, what is it that we need to be part of a devolution deal that sits within those? I know Matthew, for example, is thinking very carefully about how we engage with the trade and investment work stream, some of the economic work streams in relation to energy as well. So I want to be clear that not everything is going to go through that particular work stream. So just to come to the real crunchy stuff then, so what is it that we might offer stroke ask of government in relation to this new deal? Well, I want to say this is the beginning of a process. There's another 4 to 6 weeks of what I'm calling sort of ideas creation. So this is an opportunity for people to suggest new things that we might want to add to this mix. And after that, there'll be a process of narrowing things down, being clear with government about what we want, and then negotiating the deal with government through to summer recess. But in terms of the ideas that are on the table at the moment that we think have the greatest opportunity possibility, there are 6, I think it's fair to say, but they're in twos, and they're on pages 17 and 18 of the paper that you've got in front of you, or the papers for this meeting. So what we tried to do in this table is identify, so what's the problem that we're trying to solve? What might some of the solutions be? Some details about those solutions, and then what might we want to see? Because government's saying, you know, what's this actually going to do if we were to give you these powers? I won't go through all the details of the table right now, but I will just flag the 6 big things. So in relation to the economy, and this is partly stimulating the low carbon economy and the smart energy sector, but it's also, Matthew and I have spoken this morning, it's about enabling those businesses that needs to decarbonise to better decarbonise, particularly industrial decarbonisation. And Matthew may want to say a bit more about that in a minute. There are 2 things that we think government could help us with. One is quite a general piece about giving us more trade and investment powers. I'm not going to dwell on that one. The second is the expansion of the work that Matthew's leading on repowering the Black Country and the industrial cluster there. So again, I imagine Matthew wants to say some more about that, but that's certainly a couple of opportunities around the low carbon economy. The second area we want to negotiate something with government is around retrofit, the decarbonisation. I will try to keep talking over it. So on retrofit, it's going to carry on in a moment, I can tell you. We are arguing for. Honestly, it's over in about a minute, but there's no point. one more announcement now. It tells us it's finished, and then we're done, I think. Right. The second area is around decarbonisation of heat and retrofit, where we're arguing with government that rather than them give us multiple
I didn't hear that.
Fire alarm test is now complete.
Right. We're arguing with government that rather than give us lots and lots and lots of piecemeal retrofit funding, which is what they're doing at the moment, that we should have one big chunk over the next 5 to 10 years. And no doubt George might mention that later. We're also arguing that we need co-investment in our net zero neighbourhoods programme and potentially in the what used to be called the National Centre for the Decarbonisation of Heat at Tyseley. The last area is that we would like government to give us a more formal role in energy infrastructure investment. At the moment, we have very big players investing literally billions of pounds in the region, and we have literally no control over that. I'm talking here WPD, Cadent, and so on. So we've got a process by which we think we can have greater influence over that if government would allow us into those conversations. And we would like the responsibility and resource for doing local area energy planning with our local authority partners. So those are the asks that are on the table at the moment. But to say this is still a very open process, and if people have got other ideas, now is the opportunity to suggest some other ideas as well.
Okay, thanks, Ed, and thanks to you and team for all the work you're doing on this, because it is, you know, the most important thing that we're doing in terms of both pitching in for funding, but also pitching in for, thank you, pitching in for, you know, devolution for powers and the rest of it. A few things to just pick up on this that I've got. One of which is transport. I mean, you don't mention transport. And you see, there's a tendency to think, well, environment is only going to help the environmental agenda if it comes through this meeting or out. Well, because it doesn't. And I mean, there's a lot of emphasis in transport on vehicles. You know, we're going to, and of course it needs to be because of all the pollution coming from buses and trains. But there's also an issue of routes. And you will know that I've voiced issues. I mean, okay, it's a bit Solihull based, but actually it isn't, because it's, I think there's areas of Birmingham and others that, you know, why does it take an hour to go from North Solihull to the centre, which means people are going to go in their car? Now, you know, I just think we need to be smarter in terms of, you know, the way we look at transport routing, bearing in mind, well, that HS2 as well, that will be going. So, you know, I do, the transport agenda is environmental, and they're doing some of the most important work. And I think we ought to just think about, for instance, whether devolution on transport powers and all that, it's another part of it. Next, I've already made a point about decarbonation and stability of funding. But, you know, one of the things I envisage for retrofit, because the reality is, if you think you're going to retrofit 10 houses, they're all the same with all the same stuff, some of it will be worth doing and some of it won't. Frankly, there's odd bits of carbon emissions that really will not justify the expense in dealing with it. What we need to do is look for what works, and that I think is what you're doing in the zero carbon, not the zero, the neighbourhood, right? And that's great. But you know, I repeat, we need to look at what works, because you know, it might be a system, it might be a product, it might be something we can propagate. And that should be our focus. At the end of this programme, we're going to say Wizzo boilers are what everybody needs because they work and they're fitted easily and people like them. You know, if you know what I mean, that's just a made up example, but okay. Next thing is that now energy planning, you're going to have to be careful on the language you use here. You really are, because I don't think people, a lot of people really understand what you're talking about. What are the benefits of this? You know it and you talk it, but one thing I keep being told is don't talk like a lawyer or a local council. Talk about and in language that ordinary people, which frankly politicians, believe it or not, often are, understand. Because if you can't get through them, you won't have the people round the table be able to lobby for you. Say, well, it's obvious, isn't it? What you should do is in the West Midlands, we need to actually be able to push where they. So please use that language. My own view is, I mean, where you have headings, make them headings that mean that are actually an urge to action rather than just a heading. So to simplify it. Okay, I think I'm almost there. There's reference to systems, and you know, we are public sector, so we like our process and we like our systems. That isn't necessarily the best way of doing it, but it's back to the benefits, the outcomes. Look, government, this is good, and this is what's going to deliver, and how we can help you deliver. That's it. That's my mini rant. Have I got any speakers? Yes, Matthew.
Thanks very much, Chair. Ed kind of set me up to come in at this point as well, but I would like to also start by just saying thanks to Ed. I think this is a really good. I've now been pushing in this direction for 5 years. It's great to have a framework we can relate to and we can bring people in and engage with. So really good starting point. It's also, I think, encouraging that we're consistent here. We've been making a lot of these asks for 4 or 5 years now. You know, every time I see them, they're stronger, and they're actually. I did hear what you said about simplicity of language. We get more focused and we get more simple as well. But the area I just wanted to pick up on specifically, where I had a concern, which Ed flagged, and I hope we can address, is the industrial decarbonisation pair of ours, which are the top two, which is where I'm most involved at the moment. And the issue I've got here is the problem and the solutions are not currently aligned. So it's not quite the right problem, basically. If you're a West Midlands manufacturing business at the moment and you're using energy, right, you have a major problem, which is your energy costs. And as we all understand, it's been in the news, but it was a problem even before all the current activity this year globally. The transition to net zero, in many cases, is an existential threat to you continuing to employ people in this region. It's a major challenge. And what we're trying to do with Repowering the Black Country and attracting other people in and getting the infrastructure right is about mitigating that threat and keeping jobs in this region, keeping productive skilled jobs in this region. So the problem isn't stimulating low carbon new things in solar PV and wind turbines, which is what people will read if they read that problem statement. The problem is how we transition our economic base in this region into a net zero world. That is the problem we're trying to solve here. And it's actually easy to engage people at the moment because they do see this very negatively. It's a bit like the tree comment you made earlier. People engage with some of these things. People will engage with it. But we've got to turn it around, and we've got to turn it into an opportunity. And it's the kind of opportunity at the big scale is the gigafactory in Coventry and so on, where you're bringing in investment from around the world to do stuff that will generate green technologies for the future. But it's also about reconfiguring foundries in the Black Country so that they can use green fuels and that they can actually employ people and produce products that are competitive globally that are also clean. And that's a massive task. And it's a massive task that we need the combined authority and we need the public sector to support. And that's what we're about in the top two items there. So okay. I just like the words to articulate that. Definitely.
I do think that you need to reflect on current events with this agenda, because the world is never going to be the same again. And if we haven't learned if we need to learn one thing, it's that the Western world must not, must reduce, dependence on Russian oil, but that's energy, but actually it's dependence on carbon energy. Okay, any other speakers? If not, I'm going to move on because I'm getting Peter. Yeah.
Just a quick one. Welcome, Matthew. What you said, we did actually discuss this at the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, and I did say about time this paper came forward, because there's been quite a lot of time in its making since 2019, so very much welcome. I did welcome the 12 principles or 12 levelling up missions that they've got by 2030. I think myself and Councillor Trickett, we both welcomed on page 16, where it looked at the 20 work streams that are going forward, and very much we were at unison in the particular parts where it said building human capital, building social capital, and connecting communities. And you and Chair, you were absolutely spot on. It's the same thing that we've talked about. If you're going to talk out there to the community, there's a lot of people that don't listen because they just want you to get on with it. But those people who really do, who are engaged into it, but we've all said, please do it in public speaking, not in officer or councillor, because most of us councillors, as you said, Chair, are the same. So we have to ensure that when you are speaking to the public, it is in as if you are a resident, not an officer. That's not a criticism, Chair, but we have seen it time and time again where things have been put in officer speak, and we just want it in plain English, because if we find it difficult, the chances are that residents and lesser experts in the field will also find it difficult. So thank you, Chair.
Okay. All right. Okay. I'm going to move on swiftly because I'm behind. So thank you very much, team, for that. It's over to George, who's on screen. He's coming on.
Good morning, everyone. Jackie, would you like me to share my screen with the slides, or do you have them?
If you've got them, that's great, George.
I do. Thanks. Just bear with me a second. You should see those very shortly. Can everyone see what's on screen now?
Yeah.
Yep.
Lovely. Okay. So I'm George Sims. I'm the Smart Hub lead in the Energy Capital team at the WMCA, and today I'm going to give you a bit of an overview of our work. It's for information only, so it's to provide board members with an overview of what's happening, what we're doing, what we're planning, and answer any questions. Smart Hub stands for Sustainable Market for Affordable Retrofit Technologies. What that really means is it's anything to do with getting homes in the West Midlands to net zero and reducing fuel poverty. Challenge we've heard already this morning how big it is, but just to go into even more detail, if we're decarbonising 1.2 million homes by 2041, that means based on a working week, it's one home every 2 minutes and growing. So that should really focus our attention on the scale of the opportunity as well as the task, and make us think probably differently about how we're doing things, why we should be taking a slightly different approach. And I think Ed's already referred to that in the retrofit commissioning framework and how we go about generating that scale. It's a big challenge. The context, there's plenty of headwinds as well. Rising fuel bills, we've covered. Fuel poverty in the West Midlands is already at 17.5% based on the last BEIS figures, which are from April 2019. And I really dread to think what those figures will be when we next get the figures published, and indeed in April 2024 when we understand what the situation is now. So those figures are already high, and that actually it's a bit of an opportunity, but it's also a challenge, because squeeze on household incomes means that people's attention is focused on this, but also their capacity to do anything about it is limited. To have a functioning market, you need decent supply and demand. We have low demand, and nationally, we know that the public is broadly supportive of the net zero target, but much fewer people understand what this might mean for their homes, because it's complex and confusing. So if it's sort of over 2/3 that support the net zero aim, it's more like 15% that start to understand that there's something that you can do in their homes about that, according to surveys anyway. It's difficult to know where to start, and partly that's because of the supply chain doesn't provide the sorts of services, offers that people find easy to understand, that they can know what they're going to get out of it, know what the benefits are, and that are sort of low hassle. So while there's a sort of general issues with supply chain capacity that we see on the programs that we're delivering at the moment, so shortage of retrofit coordinators, for example, there's also an issue with supply chain integration. Homes are complex. Every household and every home is different. That means that we need to sort of tailor approaches or that there's a really wide range of technologies that apply, but the supply chain is not integrated. So there's no sort of one-stop shop type services that, you know, if you think, right, I want to reduce my bills or I want to green my home, there's no obvious place where you can go and say, right, company X, can you come and help me? Can you sort me out? And can you guarantee that the money that I spend is going to be worthwhile, that I'll see the benefits that you've promised? That doesn't happen. So that's the difficulties that we're facing and the challenges that we need to address. Funding's been mentioned already. It's too fragmented at the moment. It's focused on narrow short-term outcomes, and that gives no incentive really to customers or the supply chain to get involved, and undermines confidence really in the market. So our priorities as a Smart Hub team are to work with our local authority partners, increase knowledge, add capacity, sort of fill the gaps, support our partners to bid for funding, deliver funding. That's both local authorities and social landlords, and I'll tell you a bit more about what we're doing in that area shortly. Make the most of the available funding. That's not just sort of maximising the amount of funding, but it's thinking about how we can use the funding to learn, to make sure that we do things better next time around, to do things, test them, and do them better, and also to sort of build capacity to build those partnerships with partners in industry, local authorities, and finally the other way is find ways to leverage that funding, bring in additional finance and support the supply chain to grow, and ways to increase demand. Our programme aims broadly can be broken down into 4 areas. Capacity building. I've mentioned a couple of the bids that we have put together, supported our partners on. So we have supported local authorities to bid for LAD2 funding and sustainable warmth competition funding. We've secured £2.86 million for the combined authority itself. And my colleague Linda's also been leading workshops to help people in delivering those programmes. There's also a £7.5 million bid led by the West Midlands Combined Authority, which was announced last month as being successful. That's with 7 housing provider partners from across the region. Part of that work stream is also making sure that when we're bidding for funding, feeding into pre-funding workshops, we're learning from programs about what has and hasn't worked and feeding that back to government. Having won the funding, we now need to deliver. So we're quite busy at the moment mobilising for sustainable warmth competition, social housing decarbonisation fund, and also the net zero neighbourhoods demonstrator, which is £2 million of the combined authority's own money that is put into that programme. We're working with 7 constituent local authorities to develop plans for net zero neighbourhoods. The aim there is to make sure that demonstrator projects are high quality, so that the end customer, the households, get a really good outcome. In the past, retrofit programs have experienced various difficulties with poor quality workmanship, poor quality installation, and unintended consequences. So that has to be something that we get right. There's no point in doing this if all we do is undermine confidence in what retrofit is and what the benefits are. And then finally, sort of market development support, which is I'd say less well developed at the moment, partly because it's an issue of capacity, but also this is a new programme. So what that work is about is understanding what our housing stock is and what the opportunities are. So there's a piece of data assessment work that we're doing at the moment. This just started this week, but I hope that we can then use that to do more in-depth customer segmentation to understand what customers' needs are. And there's the sort of one of the perennial problems with retrofit is that it tends to be done in quite a top-down way and done to people. There's a one-size-fits-all offer. Actually, what we need to do to change that is to understand what people actually want, what would work for them, what their budget is, for example, what their appetite for disruption is, what their homes look like, how they'd like to pay for it. there's lots of different things that we need to understand really, and then work with the supply chain to come up with something that works for people. It's only when we do that that we think we can mobilize the latent demand and interest that's there in the market. And then to support that work, support the rollout of, offers to the able to pay market or the non fuel pool market, we will need to secure funding for skills programs, again working with the supply chain to identify need, using evidence of demand to stimulate demand for training, and work out what the gaps are in funding, what the barriers are, and to build up those offers. And then the final one is really around funding and finance. Finance is not, I don't think, a personally huge issue for retrofit, because there's plenty of finance available for lots of sort of things if you can demonstrate there's a market and there's an ability to pay. So, for example, there's no payback on a kitchen typically, but you can get finance for a kitchen or a new car or all sorts of things because there's a demand there and there's a supply chain there. So that's why the market development support is really critical to then levering in the additional finance that we need, because we can't rely on government funding to do all of this. We have to find other ways to mobilise funding. I've covered off really what we're already doing, the net zero neighbourhoods and sustainable warmth competition, various programmes. So some of the things that we are looking to do in the future, there's more rounds of government funding, social housing decarbonisation fund wave 2, for example. With net zero neighbourhoods, I think assuming a first successful phase, we would then look to see how we could roll out that programme more widely. The work that we're doing at the moment will allow us to identify the first net zero neighbourhood in the region, but it will also give us plans to for 6 more areas, so we need to find funding for those, and government heat pump ready funding. So we think there are many homes in the region that could already benefit from a heat pump. It's a question of identifying those and putting together the right offer for people. In terms of market enabling activity, we need to look at ways of doing customer segmentation in a different way, learning from colleagues in Transport for West Midlands and the insights that they can provide us, but also using the data that we get, the stock analysis to identify what the sort of biggest opportunities are, what the retrofit approaches are, where there are no regrets options that we could roll out relatively quickly to reduce people's fuel bills and drop carbon emissions fairly rapidly. So we're already engaging with industry about a green home MOT concept. That I think that's one thing that we think might have some mileage and we could develop further. On the funding side of thing, Ed's already covered off the retrofit commissioning framework, so I won't say too much more about that, other than that in addition to bringing together various different government funding streams, we would also seek that retrofit commissioning framework to include funding for skills, for business support and development, and to undertake some of the market enabling activity to mobilise much more private finance. So the sell to government is, yes, it might seem like a lot of money, but actually we think we'll get much more, both in terms of social benefits, health outcomes, economic benefits with skills, but also being able to leverage much more private finance. This is really as a sort of for information slide at the end. What needs to be true to leverage all of that private finance that's been discussed and for a retrofit market to grow, broken down into 4 areas. Households, I think broadly, although every home is different, broadly people need a sort of smooth end-to-end process with a minimal hassle. If you think of lots of different services or products and how easy they are to buy or to participate in, and then compare that to the retrofit market, then that's clearly needs to change. People need access to impartial advice and good information to enable them to make good decisions in their own interests. They need offers that are attractive, that make sense, that give them something that they want, that's not just predicated on net zero, good quality customer service, a clear set of benefits when you're buying into a retrofit service, and a good choice of contractors or service providers that customers have confidence that they can do a good job, and that if something goes wrong, the contractor will come back and fix it. You know, these are all things that don't really happen consistently when retrofits are done at the moment. For the supply chain, I think to be able to provide better value and quality to the customer, we'll need much faster, more accurate, more detailed home assessments. We'll be able to measure performance quickly and accurately to tell whether there's something's working or not. Again, that's all about building customer confidence, but also in allowing the best parts of the supply chain, the best installers, to demonstrate, you know, to customers that they are good, and in providing the evidence to motivate those that need to catch up to do better. And we also need contractors to be able to work together to integrate the different improvements that might be needed in homes. And so we need to also demonstrate demand so that contractors see that investing in training, services, innovations are worthwhile. At the moment, that incentive doesn't exist. For finance providers, if there is greater demand, greater consistency, it makes it much easier to invest in retrofit. If there's a consistent service and people are buying it, that's something that you can attach a finance package to. If we can understand customer needs better, it then allows us to tailor those finance packages or offers to customer needs, depending on ability to pay, circumstances, all the rest of it. And having an integrated offer makes it also easier to offer finance through a supply chain. Again, looking back at things like cars or kitchens, it's quite easy to finance those. And finally, local government. We've spoken about consistent funding and greater funding, availability of data. That's really important to make sure that we can make good decisions based on local need, and also consistent policy support from government. So I'll bring it to an end there and invite any questions.
Okay, I don't know about questions. That last slide is extremely important, but I would put it in a, you know, slant it in a different way. You're sort of saying what needs to be true. It's like, let's have a magic wand and make it true. I think the way you need to approach this is, what are the barriers and obstacles to making stuff happen? What are the solutions to that? Because some of those solutions would feed directly into the paper that Ed referred to just now.
Yeah.
And let me just, and I honestly do think that last slide, I would do it in the way I've just suggested, because I think that you know, that with all these things, you know, you look for the problems and then you find the solutions. Let me just give you a sample of that under the supply chain. Well, components, because you don't mention components there, and yet components are a critical part of the supply chain and doing the work. You know, for a start, half of them come from overseas. I don't know where they do come from, but I lay a bet they're not built, made locally. Well, there might be an issue there. You know, are we developing that component supply, or at least facilitating that? Standardization. If you want to do something well and with good quality, do it in a repetitive fashion, in a standardized way, and you know, take that from a builder. The moment you do stuff differently, you get problems, because people aren't necessarily trained or don't understand it, and you know, it's that. So there's a, you know, you're not going to be able to standardize everything, but you can do a lot of it, and that links into the skills development, because what we don't have enough of is tradesmen that can actually solve the problems that the ordinary problems, but they're just a bit tricky because someone's put a pipe somewhere. And then you've got systems and practices. You know, the more we can promote good systems and practices, then likewise. So that's what I want to see coming through this. And as I say, you know, it's tough because you talk to somebody, you know, that's been responsible many thousands of houses and customers. So, you know, I want to see the solutions to how we're going to deal with this, with one-off problems. And I know it's difficult, but that's the whole point of the zero neighbourhood for a start, isn't it? So anyway, that's my take on this, but thank you. No, you've analysed it very well, but I'm sorry, I am what I am, and I'm going to say what the way I see it from my point of view. And now I'm looking for a virtual or other hand. I've seen no virtuals. Peter?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your comments. And George, thank you very much indeed. And again, we come back to the general public. Is we all know that people want to move away from fossil fuels very much in towards electric. There are, of course, George, there's a time frame for this. And a crossover, and I guess is how long at the moment is a piece of string, and I think it's the public then are looking for what help is on the table for them for the future in retrofit and other things, and it's a benefit to the person or the public, and I know it's going to be very difficult to answer that question, but it's that crossover that I think that the public are looking for. We are here, we are now. We've got the Ukraine problem with fuel with Russia, etc. Taking that move out of the way, but in the normal terms, what sort of time frame could we be looking at this? And my other one, I think that if I was on the in the Overview and Scrutiny Committee on page 60. I think the public might be wondering where we talked about sustainable warmth competition, and where I see that the two areas that you've identified have been in Coventry, no disrespect, Chair, but in Solihull Hall. I guess people in the Birmingham area are thinking, well, being the largest city, etc., why wasn't Birmingham considered as well? Obviously, you'll have a reason for that. 2.14, just a minor thing, is it's talked about with contractors that there may be an extent going into summer of 2023. I'm seeing here, and under market development support update, I noticed the first bullet point under 2.16. It talked about constituent member authorities only, and I'm just wondering, George, that our non-constituent members, how we take them on that journey with us. And again, I support the Chair when he's talked about components, as mentioned earlier, being local, because we've talked about that in many areas. And Chair, I certainly support you on the standardisation where possible. Thank you.
George, over to you. If your hands up, so.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, on sustainable warmth competition, we couple of important things. First one is that every local authority within the 7 constituent authorities individually has its own budget for sustainable warmth competition. Everyone is successful in securing funding, so that's good news. I think that partly answers your question. In terms of the 2.86 million that we have, we wanted to try and align it as closely as possible with the approach that we're taking through net zero neighbourhoods. So we wanted to focus on an individual area, because otherwise, if we just to spread it across the whole of the West Midlands, you know, it would only be we wouldn't be adding anything. So that was the sort of intention. We offered the chance to every local authority to submit an expression of interest in having that funding, and the strongest applications, the best areas, and the ones that gave us the best chance of delivering that funding successful were in Coventry and Solihull. So that's why we did things in that way. In terms of the non-constituent authorities, the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund, we are working with Wrekin Housing Trust, Community Housing Group, and Orbit and Midland Heart also have housing that are outside of the 7 constituent authorities. So we are working with those housing providers at the moment. But also my colleague Linda Forbes has been running a series of events, technical support for organisations across the region. So that's not just limited to the 7 constituent authorities.
There is a point about, I mean, you know, the 2 places that were selected, Solihull happens to be my ancestral home of 200 years ago. And Eldon in Solihull, I was a bit surprised to see that, but I think there is an element of deliverability and capacity to deliver. You know, if you're not, it's no good, you know, as picking someone who then isn't going to deliver the goods. That I think there's a lot to that, but I wasn't involved in the selection process. I suspect that's it.
That's correct.
That's correct. There we are. That was a guess, but okay. Right. Tim, I'm behind by 10 minutes. I don't normally ignore people, and in fact, I do tend to like, but I am behind, and I need to press on. So apologies for that. Okay. Thank you, George. Good stuff. Lots of work there. Lots of good comments. Press on. The most important programme, probably in terms of carbon reduction, is this retrofit program and feeding into the levelling up. So the next item is Marchers, Energy Agency and Act on Energy. Now, is that George, are you coming in first? No.
I can do that.
Yeah, over to Rachel and Simon, I think.
Thank you, George, and thank you, Chair. I'm Rachel Jones from Act on Energy, and I'm here with my colleague Simon from Marchers Energy Agency. And we thought we'd give you a bit of a rundown based on our sort of personal experience of delivering some retrofit programmes, particularly the local authority delivery scheme and going forward the sustainable warm. So I thought I would start with a bit of an overview, then Simon's going to give you some on the ground what it's like to actually deliver that programme, and then really we want to have a bit of a conversation with yourselves around how we could get some support from yourselves around the table, really. So I know it's been said before, but it's really important that we take householders with us on this journey, and I think particularly at the moment that's more important than ever with the, I can't think of another word to call it really, but the impending tsunami that's coming at us in October, the next winter, for householders and their ability to afford to heat their homes. We all know that the price cap's coming in a very few weeks' time, and we are looking really at £600-700, if not in October when the price cap's reviewed again. It could be as high as £1,000, even higher. We don't know really what's going to come at us, and we're certainly seeing an unprecedented demand for our services. More so than we've ever experienced before. And also, not only is the demand higher, but the groups of people that are contacting us have changed. We're seeing more families contacting us than ever before. We've certainly been running a number of the household support fund programmes for local authorities across the region. And we're seeing probably of those people contacting us about that fund, 70% of families, and the remaining are younger people living on their own, really struggling. Average debt levels £700, and this is pre-price cap. So some real challenges that we're really concerned about. And I think from our point of view, we sort of look at it in sort of two ways. We've got sort of the short-term solutions and then the medium long-term solutions. And I think the short-term is the crisis now, and how we can all address that and how we can prepare for what's coming at us. And I think that is going to be very, very difficult. There's certainly been a number of interventions that have been announced centrally. So the ones we all know about, the council tax support, obviously the existing household support fund that's out there, the rebate on energy bills. Myself and Simon run a programme called Warm Homes West Midlands, where we're actually providing an advice line and outreach workers working across the combined authority area. Unfortunately, the funding for that programme ends in October, so that's a bit of a challenge that Simon and I are facing. We are trying to look at how we can raise more funds for that, but we are reliant on funds, for example, the Energy Savings Trust redress scheme to fund that sort of programme, where we're really supporting people. So what we really need to do is address that crisis, and then we can work with those householders then on that long-term, medium-term retrofit goal, of which what's been talked about a lot this morning. So really addressing the delivery, particularly around these sort of BASE funded programmes that George particularly has just been talking about. So the local authority delivery scheme, the home upgrade grant scheme. They've all got fabulous acronyms: LADS, HUGS, the wider sustainable warmth programme, and making sure that we can deliver those programmes, supporting those people that were in that crisis and try and take them on that journey. And that is, there's no denying it, that is going to be a real challenge going forward. It's a challenge at the moment to do that. It's been talked about already. I think George already talked about resource and the challenge of resource. There's also a huge capacity challenge at local authority level. Officers themselves are under a huge amount of pressure delivering schemes that they've never had to deliver before, that are more complex than they ever used to be. And so there's a lot of challenges there. I mean, particularly local authority officers are having to become contract managers, which is not their area of expertise. So I think it's really important that in addition to that, having this money, there's a support mechanism in place to support officers at that local level, and empower them with the knowledge base, which therefore will lead on to wider growth and delivery of these schemes. But what I'm going to do at the moment is hand over to Simon, who's going to talk a little bit about some of our experiences on the ground of delivering what we call the customer journey, and he'll feed a little bit back to you about that. And then what we really wanted to have was a bit of a discussion with yourselves about how we can support each other to deliver the immediate crisis, but also that long-term plans around that customer journey and supporting the householders. So I'll hand over to you, Simon.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the opportunity to address you today. I'm Simon Ross. I'm the Director of Marches Energy Agency, a regional charity. In terms of the funding that we've got for the customer journey support, it's to provide hand-holding really for the householders across all of the WMCA area, and the funding flows to us from the Midlands Energy Hub and then BEIS in the background. So that's where the cash comes from that allows us to have this conversation now. Initially, when we put the bids in and we were successful, which was about this time last year, there was a fairly clear process we were supposed to be helping with around publicity and community engagement initially, then to provide a single point of contact for all householders in the programme. When householders then call into that single point of contact to explain to them the processes and the funding opportunities and what they need to do to qualify, to undertake some pre-assessment around pre-EPCs, getting landlord permissions, checking householder income levels, etc., to make sure that those householders, A, know what's coming, and B, qualify for the programme. Where they don't qualify for the programme, which is often the way, we do look to support them through other channels of support, and bearing in mind these are vulnerable householders, that could include a home visit for low-cost measures, it could include support with a billing issue and negotiation with an energy company, it could be straight into cavity wall or loft insulation under the main fuel poverty programme, the energy company obligation, or it could be a benefits check with appropriate partners. Having done all that, we then get the permission from the local authority to pass them over to the installer, and then the installer really does their bit, and then we pick up post-install with some follow-up evaluation to make sure the measures have been installed in correctly, they're on the right tariff for the new technology if appropriate, and they're happy with how to use their new heating controls again if that's relevant. So, and then the final thing that we are commissioned to do is to provide a lot of the data entry that's needed for such a big programme as this. The reality a year on is that we're supporting the Black Country LAs. We are, as of the end of February, broadly speaking, each of the 4 LAs has around £1.5 million each, and the intention is to support between 180 and 300 householders who are struggling. Each of those LAs are using 4 different contractors, NG, Vinci's, E.ON and Broad Oak, all in the Black Country. And we're seeing a big cost inflation going on through the programme as well. So as an example, Dudley intended to put together a 100% external wall insulation programme and was envisaging costs of around £10,000 per home on average. The reality is that we've seen price inflation really coming through at the earlier part of the programme. Prices were reaching 16, 18, 22,000 pounds in some cases. Now, if you've only got a 10k budget, then that really makes the programme undeliverable. So there has to be some fairly sort of nimble footwork about reassessing the measures that you can put in, and Dudley, as an example, has reprofiled their delivery, doing a lot of high heat retention storage heaters, and in 300 homes, still with a small number of EWI. So they're going from about 300 EWI to about 35, and a small number of PV as well. So as of the end of February, they've provided installs in nearly 100 homes. So that's 100 householders with lower energy bills and more efficient heating systems, for which they're going to be grateful heading into the energy price cap rise in April that Rachel was alluding to. In terms of the support that we're providing for the local authorities, we found actually it's broadened quite a lot away from what we were initially envisaging, and effectively comes under a bit of a catch-all of doing what's needed in order to help the programme move forward. Examples have included area-based mapping to help LAs think about the Sustainable Warmth Competition, which is the next round of funding, which is really pushing on from the 1st of April. It's about, we've been slightly surprised, providing briefing notes internally. It's been about project proposal writing. It's been about monthly reporting, which we've done because it's needed. And we have also been doing quite a lot of work around the new PAS standards for survey. And I've got colleagues who are actively doing retrofit assessments and retrofit coordination work in support of the programme. From a householder perspective, we have been surprised, I think, by the vulnerability of the householders who are coming forward into the programme and the amount of work that is needed to effectively handhold them through the process. There has been a lot of confusion about the variety of surveys that are needed, pre-energy performance certificate in some cases, then a technical survey and a retrofit assessment. We have actually found that it's been quite difficult, certainly, to get the retrofit assessments done. And I know 2 of the 4 Black Country LAs, this is a particular concern in terms of keeping the project on track. So there is a kind of echo there about community engagement and taking people with us around all of this. The other thing we're also finding that we're doing, not so much in the Black Country, but elsewhere, is quite a lot of hand-holding during the install process and even after the install process. And I think because I think supply chain issues have been significantly tested and strained by this. I think not only have we seen costs going up, but also we've seen some of the quality of the workmanship perhaps not being quite what we'd expect given the vulnerability of these householders. We are finding that we're doing a fair amount of hand-holding post-install to make sure the contractor gets back on site, finishes the job properly, and the technology is usable for the householders. Looking then into the Sustainable Warmth Competition, which is the next round of this money that's pouring out of the Treasury at the moment, we can see that actually 2 of the 4 LAs in the Black Country are perhaps a little bit nervous about taking on as much cash as perhaps they'd be entitled to. And that really is driven by a movement from supporting council-owned stock to the private sector, be that private rental or owner-occupier, and some concerns there, which we're seeking to sort of support those LAs on. But 2 of them are cracking on, and again, you know, another between them in the Black Country, we're looking at sort of another 300, 250 homes to be supported through that programme. So it's really valuable work, and I think for the LA reps, if you take away one thing, please, I think it's please support us to support your officers who are doing this programme to make sure they've got all the support they need internally to unblock blockages and get this stuff shifting as best as you possibly can. So I think that would be my one big ask for you to take away, please. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. That was interesting, albeit sobering, I think. I was interested in the remark about hand-holding, and this is so important because you know, the difference between a job well done and a job not so well done is often the way it's you know, people are actually looked after in that process. And I'm sorry to say, but there's often an attitude of fob off in parts of the industry where, you know, you try and say, well, that's okay, that's the way it should be, and sometimes you need to be robust in terms of standing up to contractors doing it, which isn't the fault often of, it's just, you know, sometimes people just will get away with what they can get away with. But okay, have we got any questions or virtual hands on screen? I can't see any there. There's a request for feedback from us as to how we see it. Any thoughts from anyone here? I mean, this is you know, we touched on this earlier on about the extreme difficulties of tackling this, and you know, it's quite concerning to hear about the cost of materials. You know, it's what we said earlier, that there will be inflation because, you know, throwing money at a project is not necessarily the best way of getting it done effectively, you know, because often prices, you know, market supply, your prices can go up. I see Rachel's got a hand up.
Yes, thank you, Chair. It was just really to offer the councillors around the room, if they wanted to have a one-to-one with either Simon or myself, then we're more than happy to do that. If they want a bit more information about their local authority area, we're more than happy to do that. And I think one of the other key asks is just to prioritise this agenda area. I think particularly in some local authorities, it's seen as just another thing that they've got to try and manage on top of an already busy workload, and that's quite concerning, considering potentially, particularly for the Sustainable Warmth Programme, we're looking at just under £20 million of funding that's going to be coming into the combined authority sort of area. So we really want to make sure that we're spending all that money and none of it's going back, really. So we really want to make sure we're doing all that we can. And I guess my final thing is very much something that we can probably all do, is that as of the 1st of April, just to really make sure that we are promoting to householders to take meter readings. It's a bit of a slightly going back to that sort of short term, because we're just very conscious, obviously, that the price cap kicks in on that day, and we just want to make sure that people that don't have smart meters and have a normal meter are taking meter readings. So that might be a bit of PR that we can possibly all do, just to make sure residents are taking meter readings and will be paying the right amount for the energy they're using after the 1st of April. And also what was prior to the 1st of April is at the existing cap levels. So that's just a little aside there.
Okay, now I want to deal with this. Okay, someone speak. Did you want to speak, Peter? Could I just make a comment first of all? All councils are not represented around this table, and indeed we have the 7 metropolitan authorities that are directly in the CA, but then we have the non-constituent members. Because they are not all represented, and because of the offer by Rachel and Simon, my inclination is what I would like to do is to send round, a note to. I'm happy to send it, but I'll be guided by how the best this is done. A note round to all the people that are involved. So I would say, con and non-con members, just basically explain the problem. The problem is fundamentally that, there's money being offered, but we're not necessarily making full use of it. That's a fundamental problem. And secondly, I suspect help isn't being sought where it could be. So I think this needs an email or a letter from somebody, and I'm happy to front it and send it to whoever. But Simon and Rachel have kindly made this offer, and I want to make sure that it gets to the parts that it needs to get. Can we fix that, please? Could you do that for me?
We can absolutely sort that out. That's no problem at all, and we can work with Simon and Rachel in drafting the most appropriate letter. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, or any other means of publicity needed, because I'm quite happy to put out. I don't know what I know what the protocol is in my authority. I will do it, but in the CA, I'm happy to put out whatever press release or whatever as a follow from that, or Andy might want to do it, or whatever. I don't mind. So that's that. Peter.
Thank you, Chair. Rachel, Simon, thank you very much for what you presented to us. And yes, one can only feel, especially for families within low income and certainly the elderly, and all I can say, Chair, is thank goodness we're now moving them out towards the spring and the summer, but there's still the future to autumn and winter still to come. And as you talked about, Rachel, the cap in April. And one question that I would like to ask you as well is about smart meters, because I'm getting constant from my supply, which I need to go and get a smart meter put into my house. But I'm just wondering, there's still a bit of concern, a bit of fear about smart meters, because they see there's a hidden agenda about when you talked about taking meter readings, that there seems to be a bit of confusion and frustration and uncertainty about that. And of course, you're seeing, Chair, that there's a lot of call now for VAT to be removed off fuel, and it's nice to see this council tax support and funds from the council and from government. And I guess we'll all be waiting, Chair, to see what announcements will come through from the Chancellor in his, I think it's March budget, Yeah, and the other thing is, Chair, you mentioned, I'm glad you did as well, because I was going to ask pretty much the same question I'm glad the Chair asked, and that was about the info to non-coms as well as our 7 Mets. And interestingly enough, I noted that I've got an agenda here for Gateway, there's Northfield Community Partnership and Birmingham Age UK. Obviously, there are other agencies within other locales. And again, how we get the information, as the Chair has alluded to, out to all these people, so that families, and including the elderly, of course, have that confidence that there is help out there, both knowledge and finance. Thank you, Chair.
Peter, wait for a response there, but I think you've just touched on this whole issue of comms. I mean, we've touched on it in terms of people behaviour, but I do think that there's an element of ramping up some messaging here, and whether we need to do that in company with the Mayor's Office or comms or whatever, but I do think we need to work harder at getting these messages out now. So that's an action point that I want to see happen. But any feedback, Rachel or Simon?
Yeah, we are more than happy to offer that advice and guidance to all of the local authorities across the West Midlands region. So that would not be a problem from that point of view. Between Simon and I, we cover the entire West Midlands, so that's easily done from that point of view. With regarding the smart meter elements, I think it's really important that householders do look at smart meters. I think particularly for those that find it quite difficult to access their meters, because it does remotely sends the meter reading to the energy supplier. I think the new smart meters, what they call SMET2s, are much more efficient in the sense that there's not the issue with switching supplier. Not that switching supplier is a particular something that we are all looking at all anymore, but it does enable that to still happen. So we would certainly recommend smart meters, and they are all embedded into our energy bills already. So I think the average bill is something about 24 pounds of HBL is your smart meter. So I think they're certainly worth accessing, and they do obviously enable householders to see what they are using with the little in-screen monitor that they have inside their home. And I think you also talked about the wider communications in the West Midlands. Well, through our Warm Homes West Midlands team that Simon and I have, they're on the ground teams working with the communities and working with community centres to really ensure that the message is out there. So we're certainly trying to do that. But I think you're right, if we can get some consistent messaging and briefings out there across all organisations, we can never do too much of that. I don't know if anything you want to add there, Simon.
I suppose just the only one was Peter, your comment about the council tax support. It's 150 quid, which is welcome, but I think that the new price cap's going to go from 1277 to 1971. So it's going to go from 1277 to about 1820. So even with the council tax rebate of 150 quid, it's still going to be a £500 price increase, assuming that cap stays in place for a year. Our other concern is that actually some of the predictions are suggesting a price cap increase, possibly pushing towards £3,000 come October, 1st of October. And if I'm honest, that really scares me.
Yes.
I think I'm getting scared about everything at the moment. Is this, the tip of the iceberg? Look, can I just ask a question? Then I'm going to close the meeting about smart meters. It tells me how much I'm using. Does it actually tell me enough about what I'm using too much of? Does it tell me, for instance, that, what I learned at school was, 1 bar of electric fire, I think, was 1 kilowatt. We don't have electric fires much these days, but whereas a light bulb actually doesn't use very much, but people don't always understand this. Is there enough information out there about what really, tumble dryers, for instance, I would have thought really do use a lot of energy, and why do we use them when you can stick the stuff on a clothesline in many cases? So do we get that information, or is that the sort of information that needs putting out?
No, it should be on a smart meter if you've got it. You've got a visual display, and with a little bit of experimenting, you can do things like put the tumble dryer on, and you'll see almost an immediate change in your energy consumption. So it's visually quite appealing in terms of the visual display that you've got. So, and then you can turn your tumble dryer off and you can see it reducing, or you can try it with lights and see a relatively small increase, or you can put your electric oven on, or you can stick the kettle on. So as a means of engagement, it has the potential to be quite useful. Whether or not people just put it in the top drawer and do nothing with it, as my wife has done, or whether or not they wish to engage with it in that way is a different matter.
Okay, well, I think a lot of people put that in the top drawer and don't look at it. My own feeling is that there needs to be better information to people about things that really don't need to be used, as opposed to those that do. Peter, you're holding a pen up at me, threateningly. Do you want to speak? I'm trying to sort of keep the time.
But just very quickly to both of you, when you talked about the energy side of things, but it also made me think on cost savings about the information to people about water meters, because I do know there's a lot of people that probably live on their own, because if you don't get a water meter on, they will actually target you and think you are a household of a family where you can be 1 or 2 people, and if you have another meter, a water meter put in, that can cut your bill by 50%.
Okay. All right. At that point, well, it's at 12 o'clock now. That's it really. I've got no final remarks. So I just want to thank the team, thank officers. It's had to go out by the looks of it, but thank you for all of your contributions and those who've in virtually, and thank you, Tim, for listening patiently throughout. Thank you.